In the interest of time, it is 20 past the hour. Namaste, welcome, bienvenidos, bienvenidos, bienvenue at this year's regional update for the Americas. With me on stage, Peter Cedra, our Regional Vice President for the Americas, and in the audience joining us, for those who don't know him, Doug Lavin, our Vice President, External Affairs for North America. So if there's any specific questions, especially on US or Canada, you can also reach out to him. And I think you know the procedure by now. We'll go through a few slides, Peter will speak, and then there's time for Q&A. In the interest of everyone, we're going to try and do all this in English, and then for the hispanohablantes, después haremos un poquito de tiempo con Peter. So for those who want to speak to Peter later on, maybe individually or also in Spanish, there will be time after this briefing. So I guess with that.
Thank you. Marcus, thank you. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes to everyone. And welcome to this year's regional update on the Americas. So when we talk about the region, from the runways of Canada to the tropical gateways of the Caribbean, from the hubs in the US to the emerging markets in South America, we all know aviation is a vital economic engine across our hemisphere and a pillar of prosperity. When we look at the numbers, in North America, aviation supports close to 8.4 million jobs and contributes $1.4 trillion to the GDP. In Latin America and the Caribbean, jobs are supported by 8.3 million and contributes close to 240 billion USD to the GDP in the region. These numbers tell the powerful story that aviation is essential not only for travel, but also for trade, tourism, employment, economic development, and the social well-being of our citizens. Let me start this year with the good news. Passenger and cargo volumes are rising across most of the region, signaling continued recovery and resilience. In April of 2025, air travel in Latin America and the Caribbean surged by 10.9% year over year, reflecting strong demand and growing connectivity. North America also posted positive growth with 1.6% increase compared to last year. Notably, despite a moderation of the US demand, route capacity in North America still grew by 3.7% year over year, even as the global airlines strategically are shifting some of their capacity southward, recognizing the expanding potential of the Latin American markets. One region's slowdown has become another region's opportunity. Countries like Argentina, Guyana, and Guatemala are showing what is possible when governments embrace aviation as a driver of economic and social progress. Argentina's aviation sector has seen a remarkable resurgence under the leadership of President Milei, whose administration has prioritized liberalization and competition as key drivers of growth for their country. They've done this by significantly reducing regulatory barriers, signing or renegotiating 14 key drivers, 14 bilateral agreements across multiple countries such as Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and Turkey, among others. These reforms not only have attracted new entrants, but it's also empowering the existing airlines to expand their networks further. In April of this year, the international market grew by 10.5% year over year, equating to a 20.3% increase in frequencies and an additional 18% year over year on seat capacity. When we look at Guatemala, an emerging market and becoming quickly a regional success story with international traffic increasing by 45% and domestic traffic soaring by 161.5% between March of 2019 and March of 2024. And this is driven by capacity and added connectivity. To build on this momentum, we recently met with President Arevalo, who has outlined an ambitious aviation agenda in his country, including new legislation, airport modernization, and recovering FAA's Category 1, and also a commitment to resolving the tax issues. In Guyana, President Ali reaffirmed his commitment recently to IATA making aviation a pillar of national development, backed by infrastructure investments and regulatory reforms, opening the door for transformative opportunities in the country. These countries are becoming regional leaders in aviation reform and a model for others to follow. But let's not lose sight of the challenges that can still stall the momentum of our region. We continue to face the usual suspects of outdated regulations, misguided consumer protection laws, excess taxation, and underperforming infrastructure. But challenges that can turn into opportunities if the right conditions are there. However, in too many countries, we're seeing a flood of legislative proposals, often well-intentioned, that claim to protect the consumer's interest but fails to align with global standards. The result has been clear: higher costs, reduced connectivity, and frustrated passengers. In the north, Canada's aviation sector faces high operating costs and a proposed revision of the air passenger protection regulations that would unfairly burden airlines. We've urged the new government to ensure shared accountability across the value chain and a new relationship moving forward. In the U.S., industry is engaging with the Trump administration to revisit compensation mandates for delays, restrictions on antitrust immunity, and potential tariffs on aircraft parts. We're also strongly supporting the modernization of the air traffic control, a reform that is long overdue. If we look further south, we're concerned with the most recent developments in Peru, including a proposal of allowing changes to a passenger's name up to 24 hours prior to a flight. In Colombia, airlines face proposed legislation over overbooking, fare caps, and compensation, which all could and probably would drive up costs. Contrast with countries like Ecuador, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic, where stable aviation supporting policies are helping the industry thrive. We should shift gears to taxes, fees, and charges. Aviation is often seen as a convenient target for taxation by our governments. But let's be clear, taxing connectivity is taxing opportunity. Brazil has proposed a 26.5 VAT, which will raise airline tickets fares, slash passenger demand by nearly 30%, and threaten billions of dollars in tourism revenue. It will also risk regional connectivity and economic inclusion. In this scenario, the proposed reform in Brazil will increase the average cost of flying from $130 to $160 for domestic flights, and from $740 to $935 for international. In a country with a population of over 200 million people, air transport has done its part in the past decade, bringing down fares, increasing access, and connecting communities. To give you an example, since March of 2015, the international airfare in Brazil dropped by 15.3% and domestic airfares by 14.9%. A clear sign that airlines are delivering real value to their passengers in Brazil. And we need to also remember, in addition to the tax reform, airlines operating in Brazil already face excessive litigations, the highest number in the world, and high cost in fuel. But Brazil is certainly not alone, and across the region we must resist the temptation to treat aviation as a cash cow rather than a catalyst for growth. We've seen significant improvements in infrastructure, particularly the airports, but too often new terminals open already saturated. In Chile, long queues and passenger flows issues have become an urgent matter. In the international terminal, which is only 2 years old, check-in counters are already operating at full capacity during peak hours, creating bottlenecks that threaten to constrain the growth of that airport. In Colombia, we're urgently asking the government to fully implement the Airport and Airspace Optimization Study at El Dorado International Airport in Bogota, which was developed with the collaboration of the government, the airport, and the airlines over 2 years ago. To date, only a handful of recommendations have been adopted, and this is quite disappointing. We believe a missed opportunity to unlock the efficiency, reduce delays, and enhance capacity at one of the region's most critical hubs. Meanwhile, also Medellin is also suffering with limited infrastructure, and in a country that has experienced the fastest aviation growth in the entire Latin America region, such limitations are simply unacceptable. In Lima, we're pleased to see that the terminal has finally opened today, officially. In a couple of hours, actually, we will fully transfer from the old terminal to the new. But let's not forget how long it took to open that terminal. Over 6 months of delays, which impacted passengers' connectivity and growth. This shows that we cannot forget that transparency and collaboration are key factors for these type of major projects to meet deadlines, to work collaboratively with airlines, and ensure that the passenger is treated correctly. And in Mexico, which will be hosting some of the FIFA World Cup, Football World Cup in 2026, the spotlight will be on that country. Mexico City International Airport has suffered from 15 years of neglect and poor conditions at its international airport. And although cosmetic improvements have begun, now is the time to invest in infrastructure and efficiency, not just for this global event, but for the long term. Meanwhile, we're also asking for greater transparency, coordination, and alignment with the other concession airports throughout the country to ensure that costs and infrastructure are managed in a transparent manner. And the Caribbean, which is one of the world's most aviation-dependent regions, most airport upgrades and ATC improvements are now underway. But governments need to balance infrastructure, funding with affordability and competitiveness. By the way, in the Caribbean, passengers and airlines should not be paying the bill for the construction of new general aviation terminals so the rich and the famous can enjoy privacy and comfort. Whenever aviation is used for short-term political or fiscal gains, we've seen stagnation. Where governments understand the value of aviation and see it as a strategic enabler, we've seen significant progress. Across the region, aviation is already delivering safe, efficient, and affordable air transport. But we need regulations that follow global best practices, fairer taxation, better infrastructure, and above all, stronger partnership. Let's not forget, in many parts of this continent, there's no other alternative than air travel. Whether it be in the Arctic North or the Amazon jungle, aviation is not a luxury for the few. It's a public need and necessity and a public service for the rest of the region. With that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take some of your questions.
So, raise your hands, microphones are coming. I guess Ricardo in the front.
I will start with the first question in Spanish, is for the informing the response community. Peter, tú hablabas de la resolución del tema del aeropuerto Santiago. Recientemente hay una polémica sobre el uso de las responsabilidades para los pasajeros con asistencia en movilidad reducida. Hay una diferencia entre la concesión y las líneas aéreas. ¿Dónde llega la responsabilidad de cada parte y qué lecciones se pueden sacar de aquí a futuro? O sea, ¿qué el aprendizaje se puede tomar de aquí a futuro pensando en ese específico ítem, tomando en cuenta todos los problemas que hay en Santiago sobre filas, coordinación entre aeropuerto y líneas aéreas?
Okay, I think I'll just do a quick translation into English for the rest of the participants. So Santiago Airport is planning changes to how the concession for passengers with reduced mobilities are handled. And that's basically his question. I think, Peter, if you could do an answer in Spanish and maybe a quick recap in English.
Bueno, es un tema de seria preocupación y IATA con Chile están involucrados conversar y debatir el tema con el gobierno, con el aeropuerto. Pensamos que es un caso aislado en el sentido que a nivel mundial normalmente hay el servicio que se transporta el pasajero hasta la puerta del avión. Estamos en un punto muerto en el caso de Santiago en estos momentos, pero sí estamos utilizando todas las herramientas que tengamos a nuestro poder para intentar convencer al gobierno y convencer al aeropuerto para, de una manera u otra, volver a la estructura que teníamos anteriormente, sobre todo para poder ofrecer un servicio adecuado al pasajero y no tener que transportarle la responsabilidad a distintos actores del aeropuerto. Ahí es donde estamos en eso. I'll just say very quickly, it is a very isolated issue, not a common practice of what we're seeing in Chile, particularly at Santiago Airport. We are trying with the local association of Chile and IATA in working with the government and the airport to convince them that it is simply not practical, financially viable, nor is it convenient for the passengers to have to go through these new changes. What our optimal goal would be is to be able to get the regulation set back to what it was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to clarify that the new regulation foresees that passengers with reduced mobility are handled by one company up to the gate, and that the airline then becomes responsible for actually bringing the passenger from the gate onto the aircraft. And so, just to make that clear. We'll go on this slide first. No, go ahead.
Who wants it?
It's a big room.
Thank you for the presentation, Peter. I'm Ellis Taylor from Syria. You mentioned briefly about some of the advocacy with the Trump administration around tariffs on aircraft parts and so on. I'm just wondering if you can give a bit more colour and sort of how that's been received by the administration.
So I'm going to ask you just pass the mic to your left. I'm going to ask my colleague Doug Lavin, who handles the North America.
Yes, for everybody's education, the Trump administration is proposing an investigation, a so-called 232 investigation on whether the import of U.S. airport of parts into the United States, of aerospace parts and engines and aircraft, is a threat to national security. That's a precursor to imposing tariffs on parts coming into the United States. IATA is submitting comments. They're due, I think, today or tomorrow. And we hope that the Trump administration will recognize that not only will this disrupt international aviation, but it's short-sighted given the fact that the U.S. is the largest exporter of these products in the world, and certainly we would expect or potentially expect that there would be retaliation if the Trump administration pursued this. So we're hopeful that the investigation will find this is not a threat to national security and will be done with it.
Okay, then I think we had a question in the front row. No, we'll go to the front row here on this side. We'll keep switching sides to kind of get a balance.
Buenas tardes, Peter. Hace algunas pocas semanas el gobierno en Argentina presentó las reformas al Código Aeronáutico. ¿Desde IATA están satisfechos con esas medidas y cuáles creería que serían los próximos pasos esperables o prioritarios para la Argentina en las reformas del mercado? You can answer in English.
Okay, so the question basically centers around the changes to the aeronautical code in Argentina. So, Peter.
So as I mentioned in my speech, we've seen Argentina's changes as very positive from an aviation standpoint, where connectivity is increasing. We've seen more airlines beginning to operate, significant interest in open skies agreements or bilateral agreements with other countries, and certainly making what IATA and the industry has been asking for many years is create a transparent and equal playing field for all, not only from an airline's perspective, but also from ground handling and in other areas. The policies are all being implemented, which is good news. What we need now to make sure is to put them in action. So one example is on the ground handling aspect, which is a very important component for the airlines. We've basically had a monopoly in Argentina for decades. The policy is now in place, but we're not seeing the ground handling companies begin their service into these airports. There's significant interest from the international community of ground handlers, but we need the government to put the policies, work with Aeropuertos 2000 to make sure that we can sign the contract, they have the space to begin to provide the service. We need to understand in our messaging to the government, and again, while we are very supportive and very thankful to the government in terms of the policies they're making, we need to see more speed in this area. For a ground handler to begin service in a particular airport, it is several months of pre-investment, of preparation, of buying equipment. The equipment cannot be bought off the shelf. All this equipment is actually imported from other parts of the world. So while the policy has approved, no contracts have been signed. Once the contracts have been signed, we're talking about 6 to 7 months to see that service begin. So time is passing. So that's probably one of the areas that we would ask the government for more urgency, more priority to make sure that we can see some of these suppliers begin to provide the service that were promised. We're seeing it on the airline side, where the government has made it very easy for new airlines to come to begin local service, domestic service. We need it also on the ground handling perspective. The other aspect that we've been working closely with the government is on infrastructure. There's a significant importance on airport infrastructure moving forward in the future, as well as air traffic infrastructure. But as a whole, the government has done what the industry has been asking for many, many years. They're doing it in the right way, they're doing it in a consultative way. We just need to move the wheel a bit quicker.
Okay, on that side, the gentleman.
Yes, thank you, Peter. About the Argentina topic, you think this is the first step for other countries in the region to copy these new policies to a better sky opening?
Well, in the case of Argentina, we need to remember, we're talking about several decades that Argentina was actually trailing the rest of the region. In Argentina, you didn't have open skies, you didn't have significant bilateral agreements with most of the countries when you had Chile, Peru, Colombia, many of these other countries that had open skies, had open policy, competition was very transparent, and we were seeing those markets grow. So Argentina is in catch-up mode. We saw some progress during the Macri administration, but not significant enough that curtailed us one administration after his. What the Malay government is doing, which was very smart, very strategic, he implemented or was able to successfully obtain approval for all his policies within the first 6 months of his administration. That's giving us about 3.5 years to be able to implement it. So, will other countries follow? We certainly hope what other countries will copy from Argentina is the intent to make aviation a really important pillar in the economic development of a country. He wants to use air travel as a means of creating more jobs, more businesses coming to the country, elevating the tourism business, which in my opinion is underserved in Argentina. I truly do believe that Argentina in a few years, if we continue down this route, will be one of the more popular destinations, not only in Latin America, but in the world. But in order to make it a global product, you need to have that connectivity. And that connectivity is growing quickly, both domestically and internationally. So in terms of the other countries, what we want to see is less taxation, less regulation that prohibits the growth instead of removing those regulations, those taxations, those bureaucracies that we're seeing in Argentina being eliminated very, very quickly.
I think we'll go to Ian in the middle here, and then we'll move to that side.
Yeah, Ian Taylor from Travel Weekly in London. It's once more on Trump, I'm afraid. You said IATA is engaging with the Trump administration. I wonder how easy that is. And I wonder how the constant chopping and changing in US policy on tariffs and other policies is affecting IATA members. So we've seen US carriers saying their capacity, reducing their capacity growth for the rest of this year. IATA's latest traffic data for April showed US domestic travel down, premium travel down, and Lufthansa has said that there are Europeans who are not going to the US because of the administration. So how does IATA see it?
Can we have a mic for Doug on that side, please?
In terms of how it's impacting carriers around the world, I think you maybe wait to hear what Willie Walsh says or what our chief economist says tomorrow in the projections. In terms of working with the Trump administration, I mean, our focus from the very beginning and our hope is that the Trump administration will deregulate the industry because the last administration re-regulated the industry. That's been our focus. And now the two things the Trump administration has raised is the possibility that they are concerned about the impact of antitrust immunity on competition, and then the second one is the investigation that I just discussed on 232. But in terms of engaging with the administration, we are hopeful in particular that they will get rid of a lot of, or modify or eliminate a number of the regulations that were put in place, particularly on passenger rights in the last administration.
And just to add to what Doug was saying, you were saying about airlines and what they're doing, we've seen a significant shift in some of those flights moving out to Latin America. When you look at Canadian movement of flights, we're seeing increases into Mexico, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Central America like Costa Rica. And in Europe, we've now seen several airlines making announcements that as of the summer schedule into the winter, they'll be increasing significant capacity into Latin America. So it's unfortunate that some of that capacity is coming off North America, but it's also positive for the region because that capacity is moving down south into Latin America. We also have to recall, since the pandemic, we've seen significant increases in traffic connectivity from North America, Europe, and other parts of the world into the region. We've seen new entrants into Colombia, Panama, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, which we didn't have before the pandemic. The biggest challenge that we've had as an industry into our region on a global basis is the lack of aircraft because of the supply chain issue and the engine issues. But when we see crises like these, it's also an opportunity because we're seeing how that growth is now shifting into the region in a much quicker way.
Okay, all right. Questions on the front row? Okay, we'll take the lady in the front and then...
This is Cedra, editor, Aviation and Defense News. I wanted to understand that South America has been seeing a very limited competition. So the low-cost airlines are very minimal. Now what does IATA do to improve that? The hubs are also not there. And in the A-grade cities, yes, but any connectivity on the regional front is very poor. So what could be IATA's role in creating this regional connectivity?
Well, actually, the connectivity is one of the fastest growing regions in the world right now. Connectivity has dramatically improved internationally, particularly over the last several years. And in terms from the low cost, it's actually become one of the trailblazers in terms of ULCCs. When you look at Mexico, you have two very large ULCCs in Volaris and in Viva that have transcended air transportation in the country, where before it was very limited in terms of the amount of Mexicans traveling to now making it a very affordable means of competing. I've always said it, and for those who don't usually hear me, our competition in many cases wasn't airline to airline. It was the airline industry with the bus industry in countries like Mexico, Argentina, Brazil. Today, in many cases, traveling by air is actually cheaper than traveling by bus, and obviously much shorter in time. When you look at our region, we do not have the infrastructure that we enjoy in places like Europe. We don't have high rail. Our highway systems are very inefficient and deficient in many cases. It can literally take days to cross a country, the size of an Argentina or a Brazil, and it's virtually impossible. But when you look at ULCCs, we've seen it in Mexico, we've seen it in Colombia, Brazil, we've seen it with the airlines there, in Chile, we're now seeing it in Argentina. ULCCs are always going to look at their bottom line. One of the biggest challenges that we have had in Latin America in terms of having more people travel by air are the high taxations. It's not so much of how much the airlines are paying. In some countries, we're seeing 60% in taxes and fees added on to the ticket. Some countries, the tax can go as high as 60%. So the tax is actually higher, taxes and fees are actually higher than the actual airfare. Can we do more? Absolutely. In a country like Brazil, where you have a country of 200 million, roughly 100 million people travel a year. It needs to become more affordable, but we also need governments to do their part in making sure it can be affordable. One of the things that IATA is doing, when we look at transportation, and when I talk about transportation, it's not solely air transportation, it's also against ground transportation, against the buses. The airline industry is highly taxed. It's taxed on fuel. We receive no subsidies. We're responsible for consumer complaints. And we're also governments are very rigid on the safety aspect, which we agree on totally. But when you look at the bus systems in the countries in Latin America are subsidized. They get discounted on fuel. There's no consumer protection laws if something happens to the bus. And there's no safety requirements. So that's where I say many times to government, where's the level playing field? You want more connectivity, you want more people to travel by air, but you're giving all the advantages to the bus systems instead of by the air, where air has by far a much higher level of safety than the buses. So those are the challenges that we are. Are we moving in the right direction? We absolutely are. And Argentina is an example. We're seeing in Central America with several regulatory frameworks coming into play. Countries like Guyana are growing very, very quickly, but we still have the significant impact where governments still see the industry as a cash cow, and governments, particularly at the Congress level, are very easy to be convinced to mandate certain fees, taxations, and regulatory regimes on the industry. It's simply an easy way to do it. But we are, I will say we are moving in the right directions in terms of creating more opportunities for South Americans and Caribbeans to travel more by air than they have in the past.
Okay, well, we're starting to run out of time, so we'll go to the gentleman on the way on the top, and then I think we'll do one more from the front row, and then we'll hand over to the colleagues for Africa, Middle East, but we'll be outside to take any additional questions.
Hi, my name is TJ. I'm with Prince of Travel from Canada. We've seen a number of carriers in Canada either close over the last few years or be folded into existing airlines. And I know taxation is high in Canada, but I'm wondering what other issues IATA sees specific to Canada that prevent the growth of more airlines coming in and succeeding. Thank you.
Start, and then we hand it over to Doug for some comments.
Well, you saw the chart, right? I mean, that's,
go back.
that, it's a pretty telling chart, and actually when you look at the Canada situation, it can be very comparable to what the question was just asked about Latin American ULCCs. That's why you rarely see a lot of ULCCs in Canada. It's just a very difficult environment in which taxation is high, crown rents are high at airports, government is shifted from being a very pro-market. When we looked at it maybe 8 or 9 years ago, 10 years ago, Canada was a model country in terms of, in many cases, in terms of what we wanted the industry to look like. But it's gone in the opposite direction. They do not see us as strategic partners. As I mentioned in my speech, Latin America, the importance that air transportation is seen as a public service, as a public means of transportation. Same thing in Canada. Unless you have airlift in many remote parts of Canada, those communities would be in existence, they wouldn't be able to receive supplies and medications and so on. But unfortunately, we're going down a route where government is blinded by their own objectives and not using the industry as a catalyst for economic growth, for connectivity, and particularly more Canadians to be able to travel affordably. And that has been the biggest challenge that we have. Last year we had an aviation day with the government in Canada, giving these same messages on the importance of travel, showing these type of stats that, why is it south of the border we're paying one amount and in Canada we're paying a much higher amount. We would hope with the new government we'll be able to make some positive headways, but it has been a significant challenge. And that's why the industry struggles in Canada to survive, because of the many obstacles that you see. And also, frankly, why you don't see the ULCCs from North America going to Canada. The best kept secret is it's the Canada south of the border, where people will drive from Montreal, Toronto, across the border, and then take a ULCC down into Florida or somewhere else, because it's so much more cheaper. So those are the challenges that we have to try to overcome. But it's a very similar message to what we have in Latin America. I'll let Doug expand.
I think you covered it. Thanks.
Okay, so I guess we'll just go to one final question. Let's go to Brazil in this case, and then we'll do the rest outside. Okay.
Christian Fowler from Valor Econômico in Brazil. My question is related to Azul Chapter 11 process. It's the last airline to enroll the process in Brazil. Actually, all of them have been through the process already. And my question would be, how do you see the process of Azul, and how do you see the environment of the market there? And recently, I think it's been more than 2 years that the government has been promising some kind of support, but nothing has happened up to now. And how do you see that the result? Thank you.
So in terms of support, as you know, you cover the market, I think there was a lot of interest from Azul to see how that support would be able to guide them. I think in the end, the most viable way to overcome the situation was Chapter 11. It's not a Brazilian issue only, as you know. In the case of other airlines in other countries, we've seen it with Aeromexico and other airlines that have gone through Chapter 11 as a means. Again, I go to the same recurring story I tell you. Because of COVID, where in other regions, North America, in the US, in Europe, we had government subsidies, we did not have these sorts of government bailouts and support as the counterparts in other parts of the world. Latin America, there was not one country in the region that provided any sort of financial aid or help to the airline community during the COVID pandemic. And this has had a negative effect, particularly in a very competitive market, having to compete with other airlines from other parts of the world that were provided that financial assistance. So the only viable means for our airlines to readjust, reset themselves in order to be competitive was through the Chapter 11 mechanism. Those airlines that have gone through Chapter 11 have come out much healthier, in a better position, and we're actually seeing them succeed in a very effective manner. We would presume the same will happen to the other carriers that are currently going through the process as well.
Okay, and with that, thank you for your participation this afternoon, and as I said, we'll happily take more questions outside. And now I'm going to hand over, I think, to the team covering Africa and the Middle East. So thank you again.
Thank you.